Now, over the past few weeks, a growing list of cases shows that almost a dozen scientists have either died or gone missing, to the point where federal agencies are now being asked to investigate. And when you start looking into these cases, some of them have very strange circumstances behind them. The most popular story is this one right here. A researcher named Amy Eskridge, an Alabama-based figure connected to experimental gravity modification ideas. Before her death, she reportedly sent a message to a friend saying, "If you see any report that I overdosed, I most definitely did not." That message has been circulating all over the internet.
They do crazy ass shit to you just so that you feel like you can't talk about it.
But here's what makes her case stand out so much from the rest. She wasn't quiet about what was happening to her. She was talking about it in interviews, conversations, going on the record. And Amy claimed that she was being stalked, that individuals were following her, that her work had made her a target, and 2 years later, she was dead.
I can't go to a bar by myself in the past 12 months ever without weird ass shit happening.
We'll talk a little more about Amy's story in a second. And then there's this case. On February 27th, William Neil McCasland, a retired U.S. Air Force Major General, walks out of his home and never comes back. And these stories, they've been piling up, one after another, to the point where people can't ignore it anymore. So when you put it all together, you've got multiple people, different backgrounds, different situations, all being grouped into the same conversation, which raises the real question: what's actually going on with these disappearances? And more importantly, what does all of this tell us? So to understand why this conversation is spreading so much, let's start with Amy's story. Amy Escridge was a 34-year-old researcher out of Huntsville, Alabama, someone who was described as a genius, someone who didn't just follow science, but questioned it, from the way the universe works all the way down to the smallest particles. But she wasn't just thinking about ideas, she was actually building something. She co-founded an organization called the Institute for Exotic Science, where her work focused on experimental propulsion, including concepts like anti-gravity research. And that's where things start to get interesting, because back in 2020, she did an interview that's now getting a lot of attention. And in that interview, Amy claimed that once they started making progress on their particular research, everything changed. Among some of the things she said were, "We discovered anti-gravity and our lives went to shit. People started sabotaging us. It's harassment, threats, it's awful." And then she says this: "If you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. But if you do it in private, they'll bury you and it won't even make the news."
If you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. If you stick your neck out in private, fuck you. They will bury you. They will burn down your house while you're sleeping in your bed, and it won't even make the news.
And what she's describing in that interview is a situation that kept getting worse. Threats that started small and kept escalating to the point where she felt like she couldn't ignore anymore. She wasn't just worried, she was literally scared for her life, and she wanted the world to know that.
He's like, he gave me a spectrophotometer this one time, and I took it home and I opened the box and a snake crawled out of it. That's a real story I heard. That's a real story. And like, I go to these networking events and they're like, "Richard Eskridge, you're Richard Eskridge's daughter. He's fucking crazy and he's fucking smart." But so I crash the Hell 5 parties all the time. And man, my contact form on my website is like you said, it filters for the quality people. Oops, the problem with that.
2 years later, Amy Escridge was dead, ruled as a suicide. Case closed. Now, when you hear that particular story, especially with everything going on, it's easy to see why people are starting to connect the dots, because now her name is being included in a growing list of almost a dozen scientists who have either died or gone missing. And it's gotten to the point where the FBI has apparently decided to step in to look further, to look into whether any of these cases could be connected, which, sure, we'll see what comes out of that, right? The FBI is apparently working alongside agencies like the Department of Energy and other federal investigators. Now, interestingly enough, even Amy's own father, who spent his career working at NASA, actually pushed back on the idea that something darker is going on. His response: "Scientists die also, just like other people." And NASA itself has come out saying there's no indication of any national security threat connected to these cases, which, okay, maybe that's true, or maybe that's exactly what you'd expect them to say. I'm just saying.
Just before her death in 2022, Amy Escridge had announced plans to present her groundbreaking work in anti-gravity technology. The 34-year-old had been openly experimenting in the field and founded a research company called the Institute for Exotic Science to establish a more public space for developments in anti-gravity work. Her death from a supposed self-inflicted gunshot wound has long been questioned, since she had expressed fearing for her life at the time. She worked closely with her father, According to NASA, Richard Eskridge is a retired engineer whose many projects included novel work on a system to propel spacecraft with high-speed plasmoids. In speaking with him, Eskridge dismissed any link between the death of his daughter to the 10 other scientists who've mysteriously died or gone missing over the past few years. All had links to government secrets and programs tied to military defense and UFOs. Richard Eskridge did not want to be interviewed, but he told me on the phone, scientists also die just like other people. Nonetheless, suspicion abounds.
So on one side, you have a woman who made serious claims about harassment, threats, and feeling like she was being targeted. I actually think what she went through is called gang stalking. I've heard about it before. I don't know too much about gang stalking, but I've kind of just seen it being talked about on the internet. Maybe if you know more about it, please let me know in the comment section below, right? But on the other side, you also have officials saying there's no evidence that any of this is connected. And that gap is exactly where this entire story starts to grow. Now, Amy's story didn't really take off until recently, until her name started being linked to a growing list of scientists being grouped together online. And once that started happening, the conversation changed. It went from one isolated case to people asking, how come all of these names keep showing up together? And that's where the story starts to really shift. Because the question isn't just about what happened to Amy, it's why her story is now being used as part of something much bigger, or why has her story started a bigger conversation when it comes to all these scientists disappearing or dying. And then you have another case, William Neil McCasland, a retired U.S. Air Force Major General who once led major research programs, including work tied to advanced technology and space-related projects. We're talking about someone who wasn't just in the military. This guy was literally running multi-billion-dollar research operations with decades of experience in aerospace and national security. Then on February 27, 2026, he walks out of his home in New Mexico, leaves behind his phone, his glasses, and disappears. No confirmed sightings since, no clear answers on what really happened to him. Authorities eventually issue a silver alert, which is basically an emergency broadcast, the kind they put out when a vulnerable adult goes missing and there are serious concerns for their safety. Local investigators get involved, and eventually even the FBI joins the search. Now, naturally, because of his background, people started asking a bunch of questions. Some point to his past role in Air Force research, others bring up his brief connection to the UFO space. But here's where it gets interesting. His own wife came out publicly and pushed back on basically everything people were saying online. According to his wife, he didn't have any special access to UFO secrets. He wasn't sitting on classified information, and most of what was spreading online was simply not true, according to her. Now, on one hand, that could mean exactly what she's saying, that people are just running with a story, running with a conspiracy. On the other hand, if you wanted to shut something down quickly, having the person closest to him come out and say something like this, like, there's nothing going on, is probably the most effective way to do it. Just something to think about. And while that case still has no resolution, no answers, no sign of him, nobody really even knows what the hell happened to him. That's crazy, right? Another name got added to the list as well. However, this happened on June 2025, and that name was Monica Reza, a 60-year-old scientist who served as a director at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. On June 22, 2025, she goes on a hike in the Angeles National Forest with two friends. At one point, she falls about 30 feet behind them, and the next moment, she's gone. No noise, no struggle, no trace. Search teams come in, dogs, helicopters, thermal imaging. They scan the entire area for days. The only thing they find is a beanie hundreds of feet below the trail. And even after all that, her body was never found. No confirmed foul play, no clear explanation, just gone. She's literally still missing. Nobody knows what happened to her. And while that case remains open with no answers, another name was already making headlines. This time, not a disappearance, a cold-blooded murder. Nuno Loureiro, a professor at MIT, director of the Plasma Science and Fusion Center, someone working at the forefront of fusion energy, studying plasma, turbulence, the kind of research that could shape the future of energy itself. In December 2025, he's at home with his family, just a normal night. A man then shows up to his doorstep pretending to have a package. He rings the doorbell. Moments later, gunshots. Nuno's hit multiple times and later dies from his injuries. Authorities investigate and identify a suspect, someone who, according to the FBI, actually had prior connection to him from a university program in Portugal years earlier. And it turns out that same suspect was later linked to another mass shooting. The FBI conducted their investigation and determined the motive was entirely personal, a decades-old grievance with no connection to his research or work. Just another case with its own set of circumstances. But once again, his name ends up on that same list, grouped together with disappearances, with unrelated deaths as part of something bigger. And that's where things really start to blur. Because now you've got a disappearance in the mountains, a shooting at someone's home, and another strange disappearance. And when you look at it like that, it starts to feel connected, especially considering the fact that all these people were doing work that could literally change the future of life. Even if the reality behind each case tells a completely different story, it's still kind of strange that this is happening, like it continues to happen. And that's what makes all this so confusing. Because when you look at these cases individually, they're completely different and they don't seem connected, right? But even with that being the case, for some reason, it still feels like something bigger is going on and we just don't know it. Now, the actual information we have on a lot of these cases is kind of limited because we're just going based off of what law enforcement and the authorities are saying, right? So I guess we just don't know. But that hasn't stopped the narrative, because once people start connecting the dots, even when they don't fully match, it becomes something else entirely. And then there's another story, David Wilcock, a well-known figure in the UFO space, author, researcher, someone who also built a large following talking about aliens, consciousness, and hidden knowledge. In April 2026, he calls authorities himself, says he needs to leave, mentions health issues, financial stress, and moments later, as deputies arrive, he's found outside his home with a gun. Within minutes, he takes his own life. Authorities confirm the incident. His family later states that he had been struggling with depression and overwhelming financial pressure, and they make it clear there was no foul play involved. But what makes his case stand out is that he was a content creator, someone who spoke directly to his audience and in many ways let people into his life, which is why after everything that's happened, a lot of his viewers start kind of looking back on his journey and they're trying to piece this together, questioning if they might have missed something. Also, it's worth noting that David Wilcock wasn't a scientist. He was in fact a content creator, however, who talked about this world, but he wasn't formally part of it. And yet his name still ended up on this same list. So now you've got cases like this with clear timelines, clear circumstances, still being grouped together with everything else. And that's when you really have to ask, are we looking at a pattern here? Or are we watching people building one in real time? And what's actually going on here? Is all this just a coincidence, like some people have suggested?
There are these 10 missing scientists with access to classified stuff, nuclear material, aerospace. They've all gone missing or turned up dead in the last couple months. Based on what you've been briefed, what do you think is happening here, and do you think that this is connected or totally random?
Well, I hope it's random, but we're going to know in the next week and a half. I just left the meeting on that subject, so pretty serious stuff. But we're going to be hopefully, I don't know, coincidence, if you whatever you want to call it. But some of them were very important people, and we're going to look at it over the next short time.
Or is this one of those situations where people who claim they're working on something unconventional, something that challenges established ideas, end up at the center of something much darker? Now, me personally, I like to stay grounded in reality. That's why I was even hesitant to make this video in the first place. But when you actually break these cases down, they're all very different. None of these people are like connected to each other in that way, right? These are different outcomes, different timelines, different circumstances. But at the same time, you can't ignore how it looks when you put them all next to each other. People speaking about controversial research, people saying they felt targeted, and then later their names showing up in the headlines about them being dead, like in Amy's case, right? And I'm not saying that there's some hidden plot behind all this, because honestly, I don't really know, but I am saying that it creates a certain feeling, because at a certain point, you start asking yourself how much of this is just coincidence, and how much of it is something we simply don't understand yet. And more importantly, how do you separate what's real from what people want to believe is real? Or should I say, what reality they're selling us? Because we don't really know if what we're being told actually happened, right? At the end of the day, we just don't know. And how come every time something like this happens, there's always voices coming out trying to shut it down, saying there's nothing here, nothing to see, and that is just a coincidence? It just makes you wonder is what I'm trying to say. Now, what are officials actually saying about all this? Like, what are the authorities saying about this? Because behind the scenes, there is something happening, according to them. According to the FBI, they've actually launched a broader investigation into these string of deaths and disappearances involving at least 10 scientists connected to sensitive research. At the same time, members of Congress have stepped in, sending formal requests asking for answers. Even Donald Trump has acknowledged the situation publicly, calling it serious stuff, and saying he expects answers soon on whether any of this is connected. But then you hear the other side. NASA comes out and says there's no indication of any national security threat. Investigators say there's no confirmed link between these cases. So now we're left in a position where we don't actually know what's going on. And I'll be honest with you, I really don't know what to believe here. Because even if there's something deeper going on, how would we actually know? Like realistically, what would that even look like? Because if that, let's say, was the truth, it's not something the average person would just be able to figure out overnight. You get what I'm saying? And at the same time, that doesn't automatically guarantee that everything we're seeing is connected either. So now we're kind of stuck in this middle space where things do feel off, but you don't really have the tangible proof to prove that something is off. It's almost like, you know, when you're dealing with a narcissist and they've got you so twisted around the facts that you start questioning your own reality on some gaslighting shit. That's exactly how this story feels to me. So it's not necessarily what we know, but how much of it we don't know. And honestly, when I see stories like this, it kind of makes me think about something bigger. Because as all this is happening, there's also so much noise around us. Social media, constant content, things always competing for our attention. And whether intentional or not, it pulls us away from actually sitting with stories like this. Because the reality is most people are just trying to get through their day, their own personal responsibilities, just surviving. And when you're in that space, you don't really have the time nor the mental bandwidth to dig into stuff like this on a deeper level. So these stories, they come and go and they trend for a couple business days. People talk about them for a moment and then everyone moves on and just forgets about it. But when you actually slow it down and kind of look at the stories of these individuals who unfortunately passed away in this way, some of them disappeared, we don't even know what happened to them, it makes you question things. People like Amy Escridge, someone who is described as a genius, who dedicated her life to this work. Whether you agree with her ideas or not, that's not even the point, right? The point is these were real people with real lives who spent years working on things they believed in. And then their stories end up here. And then you have someone like Monica, who goes on a hike and just disappears. And it just makes you pause for a second. So regardless of what you believe, these aren't just headlines. These were real people who were affected here, okay? And it looks like we don't really have clear answers as to what really happened here. And maybe that's the part that's made people so intrigued by all this. I guess we'll never know why all these scientists are dropping like nothing. I do, however, think it's worth talking about because this entire thing is very shady. If you made it this far, drop a like on this video, subscribe if you're new here. My name is Blackie Speaks, nice to meet you. What do you guys think about this entire conversation regarding why so many scientists are disappearing and some of them are even dying? I'm sure you guys have something to say about this. So I'll catch you guys in the comment section below. Of course, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace. I'm out.